My family always played a lot of music, sang a lot of music. My mom was had grown up in the choir at church, and she was one of 12 kids that all sang. Both my parents from Oklahoma, and they really brought that. My mom especially really brought that sense of music and sing along and harmony. And in fact, she would always sing in the car, and she never sang melody. She heard harmony first. I just kind of picked up on that thing where she could hear the alternate melodies of songs. And at 10 years old, my parents got me a guitar. I was trying to learn the songs that came with the little booklet, On Top of Old Smoky and Down in the Valley and all those things, and was having a hard time, so I just started making up stuff. It wasn't because I was a genius, it's because I was so bad at learning anybody else's songs. And I got the bug, and it stayed with me. I continued to work on that, many, many years of writing horrible songs, and then in my early 20s started to get some notice from LA, and we were living up in the middle of the San Joaquin Valley at that time in Visalia, California. And a friend heard some things, gave them to another friend, and I got invited down and wound up moving Sharon and Maya, our daughter. Sharon's my wife. The three of us moved down in the mid-'70s, and kind of took off from there. I've considered myself a songwriter, honestly, since I had no right to, when I was 10 or 11 years old. Yeah. Even my attempts at performing and putting together bands, and I would always embed a bunch of my own tunes into the show.
Like cover band.
Yeah, even though everybody told me not to do it, I always would sneak in some. And so it was always about getting the songs heard.
Yeah.
And everything I've done in the last few decades has always been that, whether I'm producing or performing my own stuff or working with other artists or co-writing, they're all just mechanisms to get my songs out there in the world. My lifetime friend, Doug Gilmore, who recently died, and at that time he had some pull, and he was a publisher, producer. He heard a few of my songs, which I go back and think of the songs he heard, and it makes me question his judgment. But he got excited, and I came down for a few visits, and he finagled an artist deal for me with Terry Melcher and Bruce Johnston, who had a subsidiary label at RCA called Equinox. So they brought me down on an artist deal.
Right.
And we spent 6-7 months in the studio working on that first album. And the day the album came out, RCA dropped Equinox. Moved my family down, everybody's kind of uprooted, and what are we going to do? And it was pretty tough, but Doug stuck with us the whole time and made sure we could make the rent, and gave us an old car he wasn't using. And I mean, it was pretty desperate. But I kept writing. Sonny Curtis, who a lot of people will know, amazing songwriter, he was doing a lot of demos and jingles, commercials at that time. And he was a fan of my voice. And he said, you can make $100 if you'll come down and do this demo for us for this jingle. You don't have to, they won't use your voice, they just want to hear it, and I want somebody that doesn't sound like everybody else. So I did it. And I didn't want to. I was convinced I didn't come down here to sell Chryslers. That wasn't my...
You're an artiste.
That's exactly right. But I did it for the $100, and he promised me it would not go any further. Next Christmas Eve, we are packing the car to go back to Visalia with our tail between our legs, because there's just no money. Nothing's going on. So we take a car that Doug gave us, and we're driving it back home to tell everybody we was a miserable failure. And in the mailbox is a stack of envelopes. And I start opening them up, and there's all these checks for $500, $600, $700. They're made out to me, and I never heard of this company. And they're all from Piece of Cake Productions. So I called Doug, and I said, man, somebody's made a horrible mistake, but I'm really tempted to cash these checks, And he said, well, I don't know what it is. I never heard of them. Finally, he calls Sonny, and Sonny starts laughing. He says, oh, yeah, they picked up that demo. It went national, and that's your first 13 weeks of royalties for your singing.
And you're back in
And we had $7,000, which was $1 million in that point in time. And we stayed, continued to write, picked up some more artist stuff, started to get cuts. Doug got my stuff to Ray Stevens and Marty Robbins, and a lot of his, he was from Nashville. A lot of his friends, Jerry Reed, cut some of my stuff. The first big break, Jennifer Warnes, Could It Be Love, at the very end of the 70s, 79, I think. She did an amazing job on that song. Well, and it's real close to demo, which I always appreciate when the artists honor that. And she was amazing. In fact, Famous Blue Raincoat's one of my all-time favorite records. So that got a lot of attention and a lot of radio play, and that brought me indirectly to the attention of Karen Brooks, who was the new artist in the country scene for Warner Brothers that was cutting, from Nashville at the time, cutting her record with Brian Ahern out in North Hollywood, Emmylou Harris's husband at the time. And she really liked some of my songs, brought them to Brian. Brian really liked them. He invited me to come in and be a arranger on the project because he liked my kind of funky demos. They were a little different. And so that record turned out to be a really successful, that first Karen Brooks album got lots of country music world attention. And the song she cut, A New Way Out, kind of harkened back to the Patsy Cline early 50s, more jazzy, Willie Nelson written kind of stuff. And it really hit a nerve. A lot of people really liked that. From there, Warner Brothers Music approached me about being a songwriter, staff writer. And that's when I started making trips to Nashville and started co-writing for the first time. I'd always written alone prior to that. A couple of the first people that Warner's put me with, because I left it to them, since I knew so little about that, was Donnie Lowry, who is still just a great guy and a great friend. And he and I wrote Why Does It Have to Be Wrong or Right? That was one of the first things we wrote together. And we almost did it, yeah, but it was funny because I came in determined not to completely give into this co-writer Nashville, cookie cutter deal. Yeah. So I said, let's kind of show, and Donnie was a bit of a rebel too, so it was, let's write something that we absolutely love, that we know that no one's ever going to cut. And the subject matter is basically, why do I have to be faithful to one? What's the harm? It's asking that question, that people will secretly ask often. But we knew that wasn't going to fly in the 80s in Nashville. And there was no bands that were going to tackle that harmony scheme that was going on. And within the next year, Restless Heart formed. Tim Dubois, who's the producer of Restless Heart, was on staff as a songwriter at Warner Brothers. He was hearing all these demos come through, and he called and said, we're going to use this song on Restless Heart. Yeah. And they cut Tender Lie, the next album, or 2 albums later, which was a #1 record that they, of mine, that they cut. Also a song unlike anything on the radio. So we were lucky to have that moment in time in country music where the boundaries just kind of laid down for a few years. You could try stuff. When I was out there a lot, I was kind of put off actually by there was a sense of it was a song mill kind of a concept, a lot of get it written by noon, and it was more quantity than quality. And although there were people who were really great at doing that, right? Yeah. I wasn't. Yeah. I'm rewriting stuff that came out in the 70s in my head. How could I make that better now? Yeah. So that's just not the way that I worked well. But I was fortunate in that what I do write, and I've always admittedly written very selfishly, I write what I like, and if I'm tired of writing a certain style, I, alone or with a co-writer, will spend a lot of time investing in other styles we like and try to figure out what makes that magical, and go write in that style. Jack Ruth and I, who I write a lot of songs with, recently did that with country swing, which I've always loved, and it's always bothered me that country let go of that, which was jazz. These were big band productions, with horns and strings and lap steel and harp and anything they wanted. Yeah. But it was country just because of the subject matter and the tonality of the singers and the harmony structures, in the vocals, and I love that stuff. And it got, except for a few little pockets, it's really hard to find out there now. So we just just sort of knuckled down and figured out what makes that cool and wrote a bunch of stuff in that style. And I'm real proud of that work. I don't know that it'll ever land anywhere. While we were writing it, Jack Ruth and I completely were aware of the fact that nobody will ever cut this song. It was long, it's a waltz, it didn't rhyme, and it got played for a lot of people. I played it at rounds over and over. I had several songwriters look at me kind of funny and didn't know how to respond after the song was over. And I played it on a cassette, gave the cassette to Emmylou Harris. And she cut the song 13 years later, put it on an album, and got a Grammy for the song. Emmy said that she had tried it many times with different producers over the years, and it just never landed, didn't fit into the group, whatever. And it's a song I'm really proud of, as much for its oddity and for the fact that it's an example of sometimes the rules need to be broken just for the fun of it. Well, something I started doing a couple of years ago in my kind of quest to stay interested and expand and get better at this, I was approached by Dave Canoin, who is a well-respected, successful songwriter in the children's market. And I'd done some demos for him. And he really was a fan of my stuff. And he was getting kind of tired of doing the regular children's scene. And he suggested we do some of this together. And he caught me right when it was like, I need to stretch. I need to go somewhere I haven't been. And except for that early Big Bird tune, I hadn't written any children's stuff at all. So we did it, and the first record that came out is called Calling All the Elephants on Song Wizard Records. It did great. We virtually picked up every award that you can get for kids stuff, and then we just finished the second one called Life on a Trampoline that's coming out right now. And it was so fun to just throw off all of the shackles. It's like we can be as goofy and as silly. We could pretend to be kids and write these silly songs and use chordal movements and production movement that you wouldn't get away with because it's just for some reason it's slipped away from the palette of a lot of writers and the pop world. But it was so much fun, still a lot of fun. And we've written the third one, and we're about to start producing that one. And I continue to write for my own stuff. My selfish songwriter continues to work. And I've been trying the last few years to write a good portion, like a third of the time by myself. I certainly have come to appreciate the value of co-writing because it brings in all that other information and all those other characters. And I found some phenomenally talented people, but there is a part of me that knows that thing you do by yourself is just different. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's satisfying to have a chunk of that in my catalog. If you don't just absolutely love this, then don't do it, please. I mean, it's stupid, unless this is something that you can't help but do because you love it so much. Because the odds are you're not going to make a living at this. It is so hard, and it's harder now, 100 times harder than it was when you and I were starting out. So you've got to love it. You've got to. And even those of us that have long careers of it are struggling. I look back at my track record and how many people cut my songs and the awards, and it's, why am I worried about my house payment? This is about the songwriter. This is to honor that part of the craft. It's almost impossible to find out who even wrote anything on the internet. It is so disturbing. And this goes all the way back to MTV, which I think started this movement of dropping the credits for the writer. That is so insulting. And a lot of times, over the years, I worked with a lot of groups like NAS and NSAI and the Guild and made a lot of trips to Congress. And the thing that kept coming up is a lot of these bills would come up, like the restaurant bill, that wanted to not pay at all for certain usage. And there was a part of me is like, I don't care if it's a penny. Somebody has to acknowledge that this has value. You can't say this doesn't have value. And when you delete the names, and if you delete the respect, and you delete the flashlight on the creators of the work, that is really insulting and it devalues it all. And your thing, when I first started to hear about it, was like, God, they're actually acknowledging that the start of this, the value of this, the thrill of this started with these people who wrote these songs. And you're honoring that. And you're not just honoring the hits, which, you know, that's a great part of it, but those little jewels, and I think like most songwriters, most of my favorite things I wrote have never been cut. I don't know of another place to go show the world your favorite uncut jewels, and actually get a fair hearing and hear back from people and hear, you know, I've heard from other songwriters about stuff I put on there. The community's kind of coming to you and I'm feeling that. So it was a breath of fresh air.